Creating alphas for transparent materials inside of Cinema 4D and Redshift isn't as simple as just checking that box in the Redshift settings that say refraction affects alpha channel. So today we're going to break down what affects how your materials look, whether if you're running out glass, plastics, or liquids even, like water, and how to get your alphas looking just right so when you composite it, it's just how you like it. So let's go ahead and jump inside of Cinema 4D and Redshift and get started. And if you stick until the end, I have a little tip on how to make sure that your topology and your geometry is set up nice for rendering out alphas as well. My name is Leah Kopke and welcome to my YouTube channel, Ambient 3D Animations. So let me know in the comments what kinds of transparent materials you're making and what kind of projects you're working on. I'm super curious. So here's an example of the animation I had used to show how the alpha channel works while in compositing. And here on my screen, you'll also see that I have Cinema 4D open. This is my scene. I used X particles in order to create this water sim here, filling up the mug. I liked it spilling over a little bit because I think that just added more interest to have those little drops go flying. And of course I cached it out so that I can go forwards and backwards in here. Now we're going to talk about the render settings. The first thing that you want to do in order to have your alphas work is you want to open up your render settings here. And then you want to navigate over to the advanced options. We don't want to be in basic, but in advanced. Click System, and under your system you'll see under Legacy is Refraction Affects Alpha Channel. Now make sure that this is checked on. And once you do have that checked on, you may think, well, shouldn't this just perfectly render out alphas? Well, not necessarily. It depends on your materials and it also depends on your topology. So let's get into materials next. So in here, I'm going to go ahead and press Start IPR. I can choose a different frame to make this a little bit more interesting. And if I navigate over to AOVs, we can actually change this from beauty to alpha. Now, if you aren't seeing that alpha option, something that you want to make sure is checked on is in your save options, make sure that you have alpha channel checked on. If you choose straight alpha, it will export the alpha baked into the image. If you choose separate alpha, it will make the grayscale channel so that you can edit it in within your software of your choice, whether if that's Premiere Pro or After Effects. So that's something to keep in mind here. In my case, I'm using straight alpha, and I am using a transparency supportive format like PNG. EXR also works, but you want to make sure that your file format supports transparency. So those are the first things you need to be aware of. And once you have that all set up, you can see we have a render here. But I had to make some adjustments to the glass and liquid material in order to have these alphas show up. If we navigate over to the asset browser and we go into our materials and search for water, you'll see that the Redshift liquid water material that we can download here, going to go ahead and name it. So if we select that and we have this and we apply it to our simulation in here, so you can see I have the OpenVDB mesher, and this is calculating the mesh for our water. So I'll add that, choose a frame with water in it, hit Start IPR, and you'll see that the default water is completely opaque. So let's talk about what we're seeing right now inside of this alpha channel. So the way alpha channels work is black is completely transparent and white is opaque. So you can see we have a lot of opaque parts of this now, but if we go back to the water material that I was working with previously that I had adjusted, we have that transparency, and you can see that we have a gradient now. So you really want to see some kind of gradient for transparency, for creating alphas. So let's go ahead and make this other version work. So I'll go ahead and add that in here. Inside of here, we have our standard material. And let's talk about the first thing that you'll notice is that if you adjust your depth, this is very important. We have our depth at 5. Now, the depth is a really helpful tool. What it does is it determines the distance in which light rays will bounce inside of an object. So you want this to be accurate to the thickness of the object, and you can see that it's working within centimeters. So right now it's set to 5. However, in our case, since we're rendering out an alpha, our alpha will actually show up better if we make the depth closer to 0. Or you can add just like a little tiny bit, but not too much. And when you do that, you can see that you get a little bit more of a gradient, and that'll look better in the render. So depth is the first setting that you want to be aware of. And the next setting that you should be aware of is actually more common with glass. So let's go ahead and take a look at this glass material I have here. And I adjusted this as well. So let's say we do have our depth set very low. Right now it's at 0.31, and that's working. But you'll notice that if we crank our roughness all the way up, this mug will look opaque. So that's something to keep in mind, is if you add a lot of roughness to your material, it's going to be harder to render out that alpha. So I suggest keeping the roughness relatively low. The next setting you may notice that can affect your alpha is actually the transmission color. So you might think, oh, it's really cool if we have a green mug, and you'll add a bunch of green to the mug, and then you'll notice it looks pretty opaque. Well, if you don't want to render out something too opaque, you might want to choose a lighter green color so that you get a little bit more transparency. Or just keep that on white. But whatever you add, just make it very subtle so that you still get that nice alpha channel in there. And this is a great way to test out your materials, is by keeping the alpha AOV on. So that's the way that I like to work while I'm adjusting these. Now there are a few other settings to keep in mind. There's some that I think relate more to clear plastic. So I actually did add in another object to the scene. So I'll stop that render for right now, and I'll unhide the cylinder. And it's basically a cylinder that I added some animation to make it look a little bit more like plastic wrap. So you can see that this is kind of what it looks like. I'll show you how to render out a material like this. Right now it has this plastic material added to it. I used the tiles node in order to plug that into the transmission. So you can see that the transmission color is of course affecting the alpha channel, and those creases have a little bit more opacity than the other areas. So it gives a really cool realistic effect when you take something like this and you render it out. But I wanted to point out a few other things that more so pertain to plastic materials. So I'll move this on over. Especially things that are like a wrap. Right now I have thin wall turned on. If I turn this off, you'll see it becomes a lot more opaque. So if you want this to be more transparent, you can turn on thin walled. And that also just makes things like plastic wraps and thin materials look more realistic, because glass is thicker and the way that light refracts through it is quite a bit different than a clear plastic bag. So for something like that, you'll probably want to have thin wall turn on, but you'll also notice that that does affect the alpha channel. So I wanted to call that out pretty quick. There are other options that can affect the alpha channel, such as thin film. If you adjust the thickness here, that'll affect how the alpha channel appears. Especially if you adjust the thickness and then you start adjusting the IOR. You'll notice that the IOR also affects the alpha channel. And the IOR, what that is that's your index of refraction. So it's calculating that. I'll right click on this left arrow to set that back to the default. And the thickness is the thickness of this film. So you might have a thin film on something like a plastic wrap or something like that that you're rendering. And this adjusts that. And of course, probably the most obvious is under geometry, your opacity. That this setting will affect the opacity of your material for rendering out the alpha. So you can play around with that as well. So now, as a bonus, I want to show you one more thing that can affect your alpha channel, and it's the one that is least often really thought about. So let me go ahead and grab an example here. I'm going to use this plane, scale it in, and I'll move this out over here. So we have this plane, and I'm going to turn on the lines. And you'll see we have individual polygons. I'm going to hit the C hotkey in order to make this editable. You can also do that using this button down here. And now you can see that's a polygonal object. If I switch into polygon mode, I can in fact click on individual polygons. When they're orange, you know that's the front face of the object. The back face is purple. Now, a common problem that people run into while 3D modeling, and this even happens for professionals from time to time, they'll accidentally flip the normals a direction. So I'm going to right click on this, and I'm going to click reverse normals. And that'll actually switch them. Now you can see that some are facing forwards and some are facing backwards. So this can affect how materials are calculated. What's the back side and what's the front side of an object. And it can in fact affect alphas. So let's say I add this plastic material to this, and we click Start IPR. Take a moment to calculate. You can see it more with the bare mug material. So if you ever see these little marks on your objects, this little step formation that aligns with your geometry, that's an error in your 3D model. And the way you can fix that is a couple ways. Number one is you could in fact select all the ones you want to flip, like all these purple ones, manually. And then you could go ahead and right click on it and choose reverse normals again. You can see the hotkey for that is UR as well. But a simpler one, it doesn't work all the 100% of the time, but it works 99% of the time, is you just right click on this without any polygon selected, and you select Align Normals. The hotkey for that is UA. And when you do that, you'll notice that it flips all the normals to go the same way. And if I use the hotkey UF to select all polygons, you'll see that they are all orange. So now that's corrected, and now we know that if we render out the alpha channel, you in fact have a lovely model and a lovely alpha channel for whatever you're rendering. Before we wrap up today's tutorial, if you'd like to learn how to do fire sims and have someone walk you through all the settings for Pyro, I'm happy to share with you this playlist and this video. So I hope you'll stay for that. And thank you so much for watching. If this was helpful for you, please hit like and subscribe. Ring that bell to be notified of more tutorials. And thank you so much for being here with me and spending some time creating something fun.